Hello, everyone, and welcome to God Talks with Reverend Goodwin. Tonight, we're going to be featuring Reverend Dr. David Alexander, who is the leader for the Center for Spiritual Living in Atlanta. David has also been doing many things in the national organization, whether it was being the president or chair of their board of directors, to right now focusing on sort of strategic partnerships and how the Center for Spiritual Living might connect with other traditions and other folks. I've had a chance to interact with him many times at the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries with Bishop of F. Lunder, and just have appreciated his presence, his words of encouragement, and really just the allyship of how he has partnered alongside that organization. So I'm going to invite all of you to join me in welcoming Reverend Dr. David Alexander. Hello, David. How are you?
Hello, good evening, Reverend Goodwin. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with you.
So glad to have you be a part of God Talks. I gave a little bit of an introduction, but I always like to start our time by asking the person being interviewed, how might someone who has known you at some formative part of your life describe you? So for you, I'm going to ask, how might someone who is a member of the Centers for Spiritual Living Atlanta describe who their spiritual leader, Dr. David Alexander, is? What words would they use to describe you?
Wow, I love that question. I love the way you kind of put a new twist on it. Um, they're all still kind of getting to know me. I've been here just a year now in Atlanta, but they did call me, and we've been in a relationship for quite some time with each other. So they've gotten to know me really well. I think that they would describe me. I hope that they would describe me as kind, compassionate, gentle soul on many levels. But underneath that gentle easiness, I think I'm, you know, really easy to get along with. They're kind of easygoing at the surface level. But what's underneath that is a deep passion for justice, for racial equality, for really transformation of the planet through awakening of spirituality. And so people at the entry level, they get to know me as very quiet and kind of taking a back seat in conversations and just kind of being present. And then all of a sudden they get to know me and it's like, whoa, where'd all that passion come from? And they would, I'm pretty, I think, fun-loving person. I am a fanatic about baseball and history and architecture and gardening and things like that are my passions. And so I'm always weaving stories of those types into my sermons and making people care about. I left in Portland after 15 years of pastoring there, a whole group of baseball fans and in particular St. Louis Cardinal fans, simply because I talked about it all the time, and they would have never otherwise cared or known anything about them. But it just popped into too many sermons for them to be able to avoid it. So whatever I'm passionate or engaged in, I'm very a loyal person, and I will, study the history of it in the background and really. Um, Ascribe sort of my whole being to it so that I can really put my stamp behind it. And I've been that way, since I was a kid. The shoes I would wear or whatever, sort of brands I attracted myself to, I would really kind of like be like, well, what's this brand all about? Is this something I can get behind? you know? Yeah.
So I'm gonna you just said something that of course I want to ask a little bit more about. Um, I'm curious about what's your driving passion right now. What's getting you out of bed in the morning?
Mm.
So I want you to answer that, but I'm gonna add a little comma, and what's David's brand?
Mm.
So, I think as you've been talking about, like how you've been so thoughtful about the stuff you ascribe yourself to, but what's your brand? But also, kind of, what's your passion right now? What's getting you up every morning to kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
move forward?
Wow, that question wasn't on the list, but it's a great one. I love it. I feel like I'm in a spiritual marketing class. What's my brand? I would say my brand, because of how I've been in the New Thought tradition, Centers for Spiritual Living, really my whole life, and I think the other way people would describe me is in many ways is sort of a company guy, right? I'm very loyal to the organization and served it in many capacities. But at the same time, because of this revolutionary aspect of my being, while I'm committed to the organization and the principles, and I'm also really committed to us not getting stuck in a box. And I'm not committed to dogma. I'm not committed to structure or form for the sake of structure or form. I'm committed to a more liberating spirit. And if that means changing things, if that means becoming a different organization, if that means, it's like wherever that goes is where that goes. And that's what I'm committed to. So I would say my brand is authenticity, right? Because I really believe in being authentic about our spiritual practice and following it wherever it goes, even if it means, sacrificing those sacred cows along the way of our particular denominations or organizations or home churches or whatever it might be. So it's kind of it's not paradox on the surface, right? Because again, I'm very loyal to the organizations that I serve, but at the same time, I'm very willing to sacrifice anything that looks like rigid dogma or sacred cows that hold us back. I'm perfectly fine with tradition, if it serves us, but only if we're being propelled forward in an evolutionary context. So I would say being authentic to and true to the spirit of what God or spirit is trying to do with us. Being authentic and true to that is what my brand is all about.
And what's driving you at this moment? Like when you think about your passions, David, what would you say is kind of in this, I mean, and contextually, right, in the middle of this racial and health pandemic, but what's kind of motivating you to in your own ministry right now?
Yeah, there are two things that get me up every morning, and their names are William and Josh. And it's usually William first. He's my 3-year-old. This morning he came in and literally grabbed me by the toes, and my feet was sticking out from the blanket, and he grabbed my toes. And Josh is my wife's first child, and he was born in Zambia before I knew them, and he's now 15, and William is 3 years old, and so raising two black boys in America today is no small task. Being a parent is no small task, but having the context of those two lives as part of my world and part of my responsibility of rearing them wakes me up every day and they give me a context for measuring everything. Because on one hand, I have the world that is receiving my 15-year-old who will soon be 16 and soon driving a car and soon outside of that bubble of protection that a parent can provide, where you can kind of control their environment a little bit, and pretty soon they break that barrier and they're off on their own and doing their own things. So I'm very cognizant and aware of the world that will receive him, and what does that mean, and what does he need to know about being a 6'3", dark-skinned man with a size 13 shoe at 15 years old. The world is going to receive him in a certain way. And then I have my 3-year-old. And so I measure the distance between those two and say, what am I doing today that will make the world that is receiving my 15-year-old a different place when my 3-year-old is 15? So I've given myself a time frame, right? I want to see the world I want to see the world that receives my 15-year-old be a different world that receives my 3-year-old when he's 15. So that constantly keeps me going, because that's a short time frame, and there's a lot of work that has to be done to make that a reality. So it's not theoretical, right? It's very, very real and tangible every day.
So I want to pick up on that. How does your tradition, and you sort of, I want to, you said company guy, this is kind of the Centers for Spiritual Living, has really been a part of your own formation. And I do want to come back to talk about your formation, but I'm curious about, um, so in one way, the lens of the world we're living in is really being shaped by your personal life. by your sons
Mhm.
that you are stewarding in this world. But
Mhm.
I would imagine the other backdrop is your tradition
Yeah.
in the Centers for Spiritual Living. So, how does your tradition inform your lens of the current reality of our world today?
Well, I've always said that and when I stepped into ministry 17 years ago, that what I was committed to was the awakening of humanity. Today, I phrase that a little bit, more extensively, and I say that I'm committed to the radical liberation of humanity through spiritual awakening that calls upon our moral imagination and our personal development, or as well as our personal development. And that's something I've crafted and honed that statement over the years, because growing up in this particular faith tradition, the New Thought movement and the works of Ernest Holmes, was a journey that was very personally focused. Right, our teaching is very philosophical in many levels and is applied at the personal level. It's about how you think, how you see the world, how your thoughts influence reality, change your thoughts, change your life, learn about the power of your word and power of affirmation and meditation, etc. So it's a very personal, practical level. And so I grew up thinking, well, if I just hone my own consciousness, pay attention to my own lens. And if everybody else does the same thing, kind of Ernest Holmes wrote The Science of Mind, and I sort of practiced growing up the science of minding your own business, right? It's like if I just mind my business, and if everybody else does that the same, then everything will be fine. But that what I realized was that was really a philosophy of privilege, right? That was a very privileged position for me to be able to take, um, and it is a true aspect of our teaching. But I've grown in my theological understanding to realize that there's something bigger. There's the personal philosophy, but then there's the collective theology, that we belong to the collective, and the principle of oneness, which is a bedrock in our teaching, that we are one humanity, one people, one presence, one divine intelligence expressing itself through everything. And we are responsible to that one. If I can't focus on my personal liberation without considering how it affects your liberation, because what makes me me and what makes you you is the one, and we are connected in that one. So there's no such thing as my personal freedom, there's no such thing as my personal good, there's no such thing as my personal liberation. Our founder Ernest Holmes said, the ultimate goal of life is to be emancipated from discord of every nature, and that goal is sure to be attained by all. So it was a very collective state. It was a personal idea, but then that sure to be attained by all was a collective implication that ties us into oneness. So that awareness has grown, to say it's not just my personal development, it's also my responsibility to the community in which I live and the world that I'm creating, and helping create with my own hands and my own actions.
Thank you for giving us the context. I want to go back to little David. So, this child sort of growing
Hmm.
up in this tradition, and some of it you said intellectual, and then, but what was your understanding of spirituality? I think as a child, and kind of how has the Centers for Spiritual Living sort of shaped that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really a wonderful relationship with spirit, because it was that personal, internal, and the access point was through spiritual practice. So it was learning how to meditate, it was learning how to be still and quiet the mind and listen. And it was God was not a being in the sky. God was not even a person, even a theoretical person with a voice. God was an energy and an essence. That was a vibration, a frequency, and that you could look at you could quiet your mind and you could hear it. You could soften the eyes and you could see it. You could look out into the trees and stare at the ocean. You could see it in nature. And so spirit was a divine intelligence. For us growing up, science and religion were hand in hand, right? There's no distinction. Um, And so the evolution of the planet, the evolutionary impulse that is in creation, is the intelligence of God. Now, as a young child, that's a very adult conception of it. But as a young child, it was just energy. It was just the vibration. It was a frequency of, and what was at the heart of that was love. Was, if you get quiet enough, you could just feel a vibration of love at the center of your soul. You could feel it in a tree. You could feel it, and so we were taught to, you know, hold our hands apart from each other until we could feel the energy, and then move them apart. Now can you feel the energy? And then move them. Now can you feel it? And now hold it next to somebody else's hand. Can you feel now hold your hand without touching their heart, but just right in front of their chest. Can you feel so we would do these things at youth camps and things like, and it was all about getting in touch with this idea that you are inside of a blanket of intelligence and energy that's everywhere, and that the essence of that thing is love, and what it desires is to express through you as your wholeness, as your health and well-being, and it does so only through your conscious permission, right? So that's where the personal responsibility comes in. My thoughts are the avenue through which it expresses, but it's always there, kind of, we would say, knocking on the door of our consciousness, asking for permission to come in.
And how then does that young boy who was sort of holding the hands together to feel spirit? How are you contextualizing yourself in a very Judeo-Christian context? I mean, I think growing up in this country, we really have an absence of the fullness of varying spiritual traditions because you're kind of given a couple of one notes, if I can say it in that way. Yeah. So how did you do that translation work? How did you find yourself in what could be a very monolithic experience?
Yeah, well, the gift for me, the gift in growing up in the New Thought tradition was um, that it was always about this energy, this universal presence that I've defined, that we did not own, right? It wasn't ours. It didn't belong to the New Thought tradition. It simply was, and we just had this different way of talking about it that was different than traditional Christianity or other traditions, but had a universal thread that was similar and common to everyone. And so we would study that. We would say, well, this thing we're talking about, this is how the Buddha talked about it. This is how it's expressed in Hinduism. This is how it's in the Native American traditions. And this is what they mean when they say Christ. It's a universal Christ that belongs to everyone. And so we would see different religions. We'd be encouraged to explore our interests and passions about different religions as really as cultural costumes, cultural, wear that would be put on this thing that is universal, but then approach it with reverence and respect. That yeah, they have a different way of talking about this, but underneath it, you'll find the same one. And so I would explore. I would just study and learn all that I could, and of course. Learning the Judeo-Christian context was the most tangible and most relevant because that's the world we're growing up in. If I'd grown up in India or anywhere else where that wasn't the dominant religious narrative, then it might have been different. But I have a very deep affinity for the Christian context and the Christian journey. And so did all of the originating New Thought authors and founders and movement and contributors. They all actually thought of themselves and their writing as Christian and as text that would help liberate the Christian tradition from its own dogma and stuckness. And what I love is that we're living in a world now where we're seeing that happen, right? People like Bishop Flunder and TFAM and Bishop Carlton Pearson and John Shelby Spong and so many other, Richard Rohr. We're seeing this great liberation happening where the lid's being taken off and this universal presence is being expressed while still honoring the cultural traditions and places that it comes from, but reaching out into a broader universality. That was the goal and the vision of many of the New Thought writers and contributors. They were rejected in their day, and they were sent off in the corner and called heathens and non-Christian, but but they really saw themselves as part of this bigger tapestry that's now being woven today.
How, so you talked about earlier that, part of the language you're using now is maybe not the language you would have used as a child to
Mm-hmm.
describe some of the intellectual way of thinking about your
Yeah.
tradition. But how has your image of spirit changed over your own journey and your own formation?
Yeah, well, uh, Ken Wilber talks about a concept called the three faces of God, and it's basically the first, second, and third person, right? So, first person, I, me, the indwelling presence, the still small voice. That was something I was very familiar with growing up because that's what we were taught to get in touch with. Third person would be the big, the universal, the itness of spirit, right? That has no name or no face, but it's the universal essence and energy. I was also very familiar with that. It was the second face, the second person, which is the you, or the personification, be that in Jesus, be that in Buddha, be that in any religious expression, the intimate personal nature. Many people in New Thought come to New Thought from the outside, and they come kind of hurt or broken or maybe even rejecting some of those ideas of, Jesus as Lord would be one, right? That there's just too much theological damage done to them around those concepts that they would just want to get away from that. So they're attracted to the first and third person notions of God. But for me, growing up in it, I didn't have that baggage. I didn't have any scars, anything to work through around that. Um, but growing up, I was really only exposed to that indwelling presence and then that large universal presence. So, what I had to work on as I moved into ministry and spiritual counseling and all of that, following my calling, was really developing and cultivating that second person relationship. And it's the number one question. If I have a dialogue with somebody who's of a Christian background and they want to know about New Thought, right? That's the number one question they're going to ask me is, okay, yeah, but do you have a relationship with Jesus, right? That's the thing, right? Okay, great. You have flowery words about the Trinity and about this and about that. Okay, fine. But do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? And, for a long time, I thought, how weird, like how that, Jesus, we were taught Jesus was the great example, not the great exception. And so we revered him as a teacher. But the language around savior and all of that is not something that we would really kind of naturally find ourselves embracing. So I had to force myself to really look at that and say, well, what do you mean by that? And now I get it. It's like, oh yeah, that's part of how God shows up, is in you and in master teachers, and to have that intimate relationship, because there's an aspect of God that can only be defined when we define it through relationship, right? When you that notion that you can put your hand in the hand of the one who can still the waters, right? That does something to your soul to go relax and go, oh yes, I can trust in that one, and that one is there for me, and all of that. So I've through gospel music and through literature and through um, even Black theology and studying James Cone, and really have gotten into how does God show up as community and as people, and in that intimate way. That's been my practice, personally, that shifted and rounded out my whole concept of God over the last 15, 20 years.
Thank you. I was up because you answered the question. I was going to say, so how have you kind of found that? Because I do think that even people who grow up, quote, in a Christian tradition, get stuck on the one and the three. Um, they struggle to kind of find that personal, partly because of the corporate way in which traditions are often presented, and when they're presented in that dualistic way, I think there is a
Yeah.
difficulty to find endemic to you what is the personal part um, of that connection. So Thank you. But now I'm going to ask you, since you said gospel music, do you have a song that's kind of the resonant song for David in his,
Oh my word. Oh my word. Do I have a song?
You don't have to
Well,
sing it. I'm just curious.
no, right here. No, you don't want me to sing it. Uh, oh God, there's too many songs, but anything that comes out of Bishop Flunder's mouth, I could listen to her sing the phone book, and I would be moved by spirit. you know, um, but growing up, I remember CD box sets. Remember, you could you could go to the store and get the box set of something, and so I had one of the things I had saved up money for and was so excited to purchase was the Mahalia Jackson box set, and because I'd only heard one or two songs, and something about her voice that just stirred my soul so deeply. And so when I got that box set, I just devoured it and read all the literature inside of it about her, and the power of her voice was so amazing. So, um, gosh, what would be a go-to for me? Um, well, I love her live version in her London concert of When the Saints Go Marching In, because there's something really powerful about that particular song. You discover if I was only going to have somebody listen to one Mahalia Jackson song to get the essence of who she is, it would probably be that live version, because you hear her starting out and it's just that upright piano doing a nice little bounce, in the background. There's no other instrumentation. It's just her and a piano. You can tell it's in a large space, even just listening to it. And then you hear her very clearly and very forcefully. And then what you learn is that she had to sing like way away from the microphone, because she would like blow out the microphones if she was right on it. So very often she was away. And then in that song, which goes on for 6-7 minutes, the audience claps, and then it kind of ends and it dies down, and then it comes back up, and she is clearly, I've never seen video of it, but she's clearly moving around. She's clearly like going off stage, and then she comes back, and you can hear her singing way off, right? And then she starts up again, and so it just kind of gets in your soul and juices you up. So that's definitely one.
Thank you. That just came to me. I was curious, so I'll have to now go back and revisit the Mahalia Jackson
Yeah.
set. Um, David, can you talk to us a little bit about your awareness to this call to the role you currently have? I mean, I think there's, and what that tradition is like in the sense of spiritual living, but from I'm a part of this tradition to I feel called to be a leader in this tradition. Can you talk to us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah. So you mean tell my leadership, my call into leadership, or yeah. It started out kind of innocently. I was really into youth work, and I did a lot of youth camps and camp directing and teaching and advising, serving on some committees in the organization. And then it just kept growing for me. I kept going to bigger and bigger context, so I could grow and stretch myself. I moved. I moved to St. Louis after I graduated college, and I was a spiritual practitioner within the teaching. And then I went to St. Louis for ministerial school, and I actually left 2 years early before graduating. And I left because of Large Church, a New Thought megachurch, had called me to be their youth pastor. And so I said yes to that. I had over 200 kids from infants to high schoolers on any given Sunday, and about 350 volunteers that served them. So it was a huge system to try to manage. And 2 years into that, that church closed in what was um, a big bankruptcy scandal. The husband of the pastor went to jail, and it was a big mess. And the remnant of that congregation wanted to keep going, and they called me to be their senior pastor. So I grew up in the pulpit, literally cut my teeth, and baptism by fire kind of a experience, and move that congregation from a very hurt, damaged space of being hurt by a beloved teacher in the movement, and feeling very harmed by everything that had happened. Financially, people lost a lot of money, all these kinds of things, to doing the healing work with that body of people, those who were willing, uh, and growing it into owning their own building and a $2 million capital campaign, and 15 years of serving there. And then all while doing that, I would also serve our parent organization. As you mentioned, I've served on the board and a few times, and served as chair and other roles. And so for me, all of that, it's not about personal aspirations of leadership necessarily. For me, this is a lifelong journey of giving back to that which is given to me. I really feel that the New Thought teaching and perspective saved my life. It gave me hope when I didn't have it. It gave me a view to handle things that traumas and things as a young child that were troubling. And I remember at about age 13, meditating and saying and feeling like something had happened. Actually, 14 years old, my life had shifted. We moved from Phoenix to Albuquerque, and there's a long story behind that, but it was a huge shift. It was a shift that changed the trajectory of my life, from the quality of the neighborhood we lived in, everything. And I remember feeling so overwhelmed with gratitude, and I had prayed and prayed and prayed about some shift to happen, because the context I was in was not a pleasant one. And I remember feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. And I said, what can I do? What can I do? How can I say thank you? And I remember hearing Spirit clearly say to me, give everything. Give everything. And I knew in that moment that nothing I did in life would be an adequate repayment other than giving of my whole self and service back to this organization, and really to the teaching. I say to the organization, but frankly, the organization could dissolve tomorrow and a new one would rise up or whatever. But that's a world of form. But to the teaching, to give my whole self back to it, nothing less than that would be adequate. And so that has always propelled me to find new ways to serve. And I'm constantly looking, how can I serve more? How can I serve now? How can I was serving in the Portland community in interfaith councils, and working with the police department on justice issues, and working with Baptist ministers and street advocates, and all sorts of unique conglomerates of people. And now I'm new in Atlanta, and I'm searching. I'm going, how can I serve? How can I serve the Atlanta community? How can we be more than about something more than just our ministry in our four walls, which are now obviously virtual? How can I serve TFAM? How can I serve Bishop Flunder's vision? And I'm always searching for that bigger context and saying yes to it, whether that's a support role or a leadership role or anything in between.
Thank you for that. Something you said that I want to, you started to talk about it actually just very naturally. I was going to say, what happened in your life that in the midst of a crisis in the faith community, including a grief that would happen to be there, what would draw you to say yes? Like in that dynamic, some folks would have said, okay, this,
Listen,
wow, let me go. But you went, nope, I give myself over to it. What happened in your story that kind of made that seem like I can do this. I can walk into this.
well, I tell you, it wasn't my first response, right? Remember, I was passionate about youth ministry. That's what I was doing at the time, and so my first response, I actually called our parent organization. Our headquarters was in Los Angeles, Burbank at the time, and I called the spiritual leader, the ecclesiastical leader who ran our home office, and I told him what was going on, and I said, this thing's going to dissolve. It's going to blow away in the wind here very soon. The writing's on the wall. None of us know any details, but here's what we do know. And I said, So, what do you got? You got any positions? You got any openings? You need a new national director of something? I'm available. And it was a great, this is about the power of having mentors and those people that you can trust in your life. It was the leader at that time was Reverend Nirvana Gale, was out of Los Angeles, out of the Agape ministry with Michael Beckwith, served with him for a long, long time. And he and I were dear friends. And when I went to Oregon, when I went to that particular ministry, it was an independent church. So I left the organization that I grew up in. I left the denomination, so to speak. I was still serving in a New Thought community, but it was a standalone independent church. And a lot of people were sort of upset when I left because they saw my, I guess, potential in leadership and that sort of thing. And I dropped out of school and I went and took this opportunity. So the conversation that he had with me was, look, there would be no greater sort of feather I could put in my hat than to say I was responsible for bringing David Alexander back to the organization. I would love to be able to do that. He said, but I just can't. And I said, well, why not? Come on, I'm available. And he said, this opportunity will never come to you again. You have got to face this head on. He said, there's a body of people there that will want to go forward and they will want to call you into it and know you're not ready and know you're not fully prepared. You never will be. But if you say yes, you will grow into it and it'll be the greatest journey of your life. And everything that he said, I don't know if that's exactly the words that he said or not, but everything that he said just stirred my soul. I knew he was exactly right. And I started crying on the phone and I said, yeah, okay. And so I knew I couldn't turn away. I had to be able to bring whatever was within me to serve these people, help them create something and see where it would go. And I had to trust. It's like, well, if I believe that there is this power in the universe greater than I am, and I can trust it, then I need to trust it. And I need to throw myself open to it and see where it goes. And if I land on my face, I land on my face. And and I remember his reassuring words was, he's like, I got you. If you fall, we'll find you. We'll put something together. But right now you need to do what's in front of you. And so I was grateful for that call and for his mentorship and friendship, because it was a crazy thing to say. It was absolutely a crazy thing to say yes to. It was completely insane. We started with about 400 or 500 people in the first few weeks. And then the first Sunday that we talked about money, and you can imagine it was about a $20 million debt scandal that the whole previous church was wrapped up in. So you can imagine that money was a sensitive topic. But we went for about 6 months without any budget. We had musicians, we had all this infrastructure. And we said, we need to start planning. We need to put some infrastructure and we need to put a budget together. We need to kind of know what. And so we did a message on tithing and money and making, regular contributions, committed contributions to the center. About more than half of the people left and never came back. The next week, there was about 150 people. A good 200 to 300 people just split. And so it was like starting all over 6 months in. And so we built up from there. And now I'm in a ministry that's, 40 years old, but is very much in that same place where it's rebuilding and restarting. And now with COVID, everything is new. And so we have a great legacy behind us, but in many ways it's like a new church. And so here I built up this thing for 15 years. We had assets in the bank. We had a $3 million property. We had, all these great things. Why would I leave? What in the world would make me? And so to answer that question, it was Spirit just called me. And so Spirit called me to Atlanta, to the diversity that was here, a better opportunity for my family. I wanted my kids and my wife to live in a community and in an environment that was Black positive, that sung back to. I wanted my kids to see a community that sung back to them positive images. And there's an energy here in Atlanta that's just vibrant and wonderful. That's I think very empowering to people of color, and it's also very diverse. It's not just black and white, but um, uh, every culture and tradition you can think of. There's pockets of it all around. So that called me, and the community called me. It was a community that was ready to take on the next level of our message that has a real strong social justice emphasis in it. And that's unique in New Thought. Not every church, local church, is willing to take on that message. They're still focused on the personal development side. And so I wanted to be in a place that wasn't afraid of that message, because that voice was getting bolder and stronger in me.
And thank you. You just actually touched on, when you started talking about sort of your grounding in the Centers for Spiritual Living, and this sort of, I think the way you described it was this blanket of energy that's curated in love.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious
Yeah.
about how, where is the social justice push within your organization, given that it would seem that that type of philosophical and spiritual frame would be so critical for the time that we're living in right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a big push from the top, from our current spiritual leader and the former one that I worked with for 8 years, and our current spiritual leader, Dr. Edward Vilhune, who's out of Santa Rosa, California, uh, to really bring our message into a social context. Understanding what we're articulating now is, we're only 150 years old as a teaching, and really as a whole New Thought movement. And it's Centers for Spiritual Living is even younger than that within the context of New Thought. And so think about Christianity in the first 100, 200 years. They were still, Nicene Creed wasn't even created yet. So you're still trying to figure yourself out. We're still infants in the pantheon of religious expression. And so, now the epistles are being written, and we're writing with our action and our feet and what we're doing in the community, instead of just kind of being in our prayer closets, intellectualizing and philosophizing about it. So we have great bodies of work and great legs under us, but now it's time to put it in action in new ways. So there's a great push from the organization itself. And as I said, there's a spectrum of churches in terms of their willingness or eagerness to participate in that. And some are over here and some are over there, and it's all good. But the emphasis is on making our theology come alive with what I call the radical implication of our teaching. Right. So we teach these beautiful philosophical concepts like oneness, that we're all connected. But I like to ask a question: what's the radical implication of that idea? Right. We teach these beautiful philosophical concepts like prosperity consciousness, and that there's a richness that, and health and wholeness, and that you're whole, perfect, and complete. All beautiful things at the personal level. What's the radical implication of that idea applied to the social and the collective level? And it's nothing less than the kingdom of God. It's nothing less than a world that works for everyone. It's nothing less than a complete revolution of our world through spiritual awakening. So it's bringing the two sides together: personal development and collective awakening, and really making them one. One isn't complete without the other. Another way that I like to phrase it for people that a lot of people can relate to is like with the 12-step program. People understand the 12 steps, and so it's all the work is about your own personal freedom, your own personal uh, liberation. But the 12th step is about giving it away to somebody else, right? Which I think is very key, right? Your sobriety, your liberation is not complete until you help somebody else get free, right? And that's where we are as a movement, is understanding that this great philosophy we have, wonderful to apply at the personal level, but it's not complete until we help everyone get free.
Thank you for that. I want to draw back to something you said earlier, and I'm going to invite you to speak to those who are watching us about this. So, I think one of the things that I've been kind of working with some Christian clergy about is their understanding of giving it all away. This notion of I pour my whole self into ministry, and then the backdrop of that is usually absent parenting for
Mm,
children, no personal investment, no investment in their health, their well being, because their theological understanding is that somehow to truly be connected to or gracious for what has happened, there is a self abandonment. You
mm.
sort of said the Spirit called you to, I want it all, give, and you sort of talked about doing that. But can you talk about, because in that, I hear that, and I hear making critical decisions about the black and brown bodies of your children, like being
Mhm.
thoughtful about what's going to work for your own soul in this. Can you just speak it? Because I want to clear it up.
Yeah,
So
no,
somebody
that's
doesn't
such
say,
an important one to
David
clear
said,
up.
give it all away. And so I'm doing that.
Give yourself away. Right? A great song. I love that song. There you go. You got me to sing. How about that? Uh, yeah, it's so important, right? For me, the place that we can the context we can put that in is in the concept of that we theologically teach about wholeness. Wholeness is your whole self, right? It's so yeah, spirit wants all of you, but it wants your whole self. It doesn't want just your spiritual self. It doesn't want just your prophetic self. It doesn't want just your gifted self. It wants your whole self. So it wants your healthy body. It wants your healthy mind. It wants your healthy relationship. It wants your healthy family. It wants your whole self. And so to give ourselves away, I think we have to kind of reframe our understanding of sacrifice, right? Sacrifice meaning giving some that somehow we're going to be. And I went through this, as a young person, as it was called to ministry at a very young age. It that made it dating very difficult. Right? It was really hard to explain to someone, especially that I was sort of non-traditional, right? I wasn't traditionally Christian. I wasn't traditionally Buddhist or Eastern. I was this weird amalgamation. I was, spiritual but not religious, right? Uh, and so I would attract those sorts of friends and people into my life, and then it's like, what? You're called to ministry? You're going to do what? And it was always I used to say it was always just the killer to every date, as we were getting to know each other. And I went through this personal struggle, like, well, gosh, I'm really called, and this constantly is sort of a roadblock or an obstacle in my dating life. Mm, And I went through this whole period where I had thought, well, maybe I'll have to give that up. Maybe I'll have to give up this idea that I will be able to find a relationship that somebody who will understand me and accept that path and honor that and be part of that. And maybe I just have to give that up. And when I got sort of at peace with that, sort of at peace, forcing myself, it's like forcing like, well, these shoes are on sale and they look really good. If I could just get at peace with the idea that this toe doesn't fit, I was getting at peace with this idea that this toe doesn't fit. And I kind of got still and I just went, it was like after another date that had failed. And it was like, oh well, I guess maybe I should just give up on all that. Um, and I, I heard God laugh. I heard spirit, it was just like, are you kidding? Like, so, and the question was, here's what I want you to examine, right? Because I would always get insights in my meditation about, well, let's examine this. And so here's what you need to examine. What kind of God do you believe in that requires you to give up your own happiness in order to serve it? Right? And so you could replace the relationship piece with any other piece. What kind of God requires you to give up your health? What kind of God requires you to give up your prosperity? What kind of God requires you to give up your happiness? You could fill in the blank with anything. No, God is everything. God is health. God is wholeness. God is prosperity. God is wonderful, rich, giving, passionate, loving, successful relationship. God is intimate. God is sexual. God is everything. And so if God wants all of you and you want to give yourself all of yourself to God, then why wouldn't you get everything as a result? Right? Why wouldn't all of your needs be met? Right? Why wouldn't you be fulfilled in every regard? Right? And the only answer to that question is because you have some idea of sacrifice that thinks that you can't. right? And so if you give yourself to, but that means you have to be disciplined, right? So I have to be disciplined enough to get up in the morning. And if I got a full day, I'm going to be teaching till 9 o'clock at night tonight. So I got up this morning and I did my walk, around the neighborhood. It was like, I'm not going to get my steps in today. So I'm going to get up early and do them early, right? But I have to be willing, because God doesn't want me to sacrifice my health and well-being, but I have to be willing to make myself available to all of that. So I had to make myself available to right relationship. And I would say people have, when we're called, we have to make ourselves available to health, to well-being, to prosperity, to all of those aspects, because spirit is in all of that.
Thank you.
That cleared up?
I wanted to, yeah. I think that's a beautiful way, I think, to offer that, because I think people have the sentiment, but I think it's been misguided of how. And so anyway, that was just a really rich way, I think, to invite
Yeah.
us to think about this. I have a couple of questions, and then, I want you to talk about where we can offer a donation, and then I want to offer a blessing for you. My question is, so I have never heard of not me personally, but someone watching this, never
Probably a
heard
lot
of
of people
Center for
watching.
Spiritual Living. Yeah, it's like, what is this man talking about?
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, I look it up and I find a center near me.
Mm-hmm.
David, what do I experience? I mean, can you give some kind of a 30,000 foot view, not knowing that you're going to know how every center
Right,
functions,
right.
but give us an insight into what people might experience if they happen to find
Oh, I'm gonna have to
themselves
be
in
careful.
exploration.
I'm gonna have to mind
Why don't you
myself.
talk about Atlanta?
Oh,
How
okay.
about
Well, your experiences will vary. I will say that. If you look up New Thought, you'll find today there are two prominent denominations. Uh, being Centers for Spiritual Living, that I belong to, that studies the philosophy of the science mind, written by Ernest Holmes, and the other being the Unity Movement, out of Kansas City, founded by the Fillmores. And Unity is more Christian based in its language and its articulation, but both really believe themselves to be New Thought Christian teachings. Although in most Centers for Spiritual Living, you won't find a lot of um, Christian trappings or traditions. You will in some, but it'll vary. So you'll find a philosophy that is really more focused on oneness, focused on interfaith, focused on honoring all paths and seeing the golden thread of truth that runs through all religions, and a teaching that, again, is about your own personal development, first and foremost, awakening to the God within you, awakening to your own wholeness, sort of putting your own house in order first before you can focus about the world. And then, again, a lot of variation in the centers that you find about how much they might have a world focus or a social focus or a justice focus, although that's increasing in numbers in these days. But you would definitely find a teaching that is about personal liberation, awakening to the God and wholeness within you, learning about the power of your word, the power of your affirmation, the mindset that you have, your capacity to influence your own life, to change your thinking, change your life. That's what you're going to find, and you're going to find lots of different flavors of it. So in Atlanta, we have a very diverse, somewhat Pentecostal spirited flavor. The congregation talks back to me. In Portland, I tried to teach them that, but I had to use a bell. But overall, the denomination is fairly white and sort of Protestant oriented in its worship expression. Although in certain places you'll find very diverse communities, particularly in California, Oakland, Los Angeles, Atlanta, New York. You'll find more diverse communities and some exceptions in between, of course. And you'll find them large to small. Our largest center is in Denver. Several thousand people go to the Mile High Church in Denver, to mom and pop 50 people kind of congregations.
Thank you. As people experience different traditions and hear
Yeah,
different things, I just
yeah,
wanted to, if someone is feeling called for
yeah.
exploration, I wanted to kind of give them a little bit of a, a
Yeah,
little
and
bit.
and the beauty of it, again, the variation is great, But the beauty of what I'm experiencing now in Atlanta is most people come to New Thought from some other tradition. Right?
Mhm.
Most people come from some other place. I'm a rare breed growing up in it, and that's my lens and my view of the world. But most people bring some other tradition. And so, what I've been able to do in my leadership, and what I encourage my other minister colleagues to do, is to embrace, particularly the Judeo-Christian calendar and traditions. And I used to have people just in tears telling me, "You gave me Christmas back, you gave me Easter back, you gave me," because I would embrace the tradition, find a prophetic, new thought, mystical way of interpreting the teaching without being trapped by the dogma of it or the literal nature of the stories, but embrace them again as metaphor, which again, as you and I know, is thousands of years old, right? Some of the very first Christian schools in the first century were allegoric teachings that were metaphorical teachings of the scriptures. So that new thought is really old, right? We say new thought, ancient wisdom. And so what I'm finding in my diverse community now is people are bringing their authentic self, kind of circling back to that thing about authenticity, to the worship experience. So they're, the people who know how to holler and shout during a service, they're hollering and shouting in the sanctuary, right? In a New Thought context, because they're comfortable doing that, and because I encourage it. And other people who have they're bringing their traditions, and we have arts and worship and music that is very honoring of our diversity. So that to me is New Thought at its best, where it can really, where if you have sort of a different background, it's like, no, bring your whole self into the sanctuary, bring your whole self into it, and allow New Thought to bring new light into the understanding of your childhood.
Thank you for that lens, because I think also people can have, again, a myopic understanding
Mhm.
of something. And so I really appreciate you bringing that. So, David, I'm going to invite you each week on God Talks. The person who's being interviewed talks about an organization that they're encouraging folks to donate to. And you suggested TFAM
Yes.
with Bishop Flunder. And so the Cash app for TFAM is down at the bottom, $ TFAM annual. Can you just say a little bit about why you picked TFAM?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because that's where your and I's relationship is contextualized and based, and I just love the work that TFAM is doing. Bishop Flunder is a dear soul to me, a guide and mentor, and friend and colleague, and I can't think of a better work that is a work about again, my personal passion is the radical liberation of humanity, and I don't see anybody working harder to create the context for the radical liberation of humanity than Bishop Flunder and the entire TFAM community, all of the bishops and the local centers, and the theological context of liberation and the freedom of expression, and the open door policy and nature of the spirit of it. I think I just try to highlight it wherever I can because I want more and more people to know about the good work that's happening there. So it's my honor to also contribute and to encourage other people to contribute to TFAM Annual today.
Thank you, David. I just want to thank you so much for your time and just your availability in the midst of, I'm sure, a host of, of other things.
Yeah.
As I think all of our faith leaders who are doing this in the middle of the coronavirus, my hat goes off off to
At
you.
home with children in the background and all kinds of things, right? Yeah.
Listen, I was thinking I got a future God Talks guest in the background, so I wasn't worried about it. But I want to offer you this blessing when you were sharing with us your truth um, and your story. I kept being reminded of the image, and you've heard this phrase before, of the wounded healer.
Mm,
I think there are folks who don't allow the hard places, the places where we were nicked, the places where we were challenged, the places where we were stretched, the places where even there was some scarring, to then turn into something that then became healing for us. And so in this moment, I encourage that you continue to use the moments of struggle, the moments of even pain, to help be transformative for people around grief, to be transformative for them around the ways in which they can encounter spirit in ways that they would never have imagined had you not shown up in your full, authentic, and vulnerable self. So may you be blessed, my brother. May you receive that truth. And may you continue to bless the lives of others as I've experienced, and I'm sure so many others will.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be here with you, and bless you and the work that you are doing. And I can't wait until we find ourselves in the same room together again. It'll be a great and glorious time.
Thank you so much.
All
Hold
right.
on one
Bless.
second, David. Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to God Talks tonight. We will not be having God Talks next week because they're every other week in the month of August. And so I encourage you to tune in, same time, same place, just in a couple of weeks from now, where we're going to be talking to Bishop Joseph Tolton, who's also a part of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries and specifically responsible for the global ministries of the fellowship. So God bless you. Look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.